Welcome back to High Stakes. Elevate your game by subscribing to our channel so you never miss our daily content. For exclusive access to our premium betting picks, join our Patreon. Find the link in the comments section below. Stay ahead with High Stakes. Texas A&M versus Florida. I have no interest in backing Texas A&M laying more than a field goal on the road. While neither of these teams has shown a lot of promise out of the gate, I just can't get there on laying 3.5 points with the Aggies. Maybe if it were a pick 'em, but I am anticipating a classic tight, defense-first SEC battle in the swamp on Saturday. Let's back the Gators at home getting 3.5 points. A&M dropped their opening contest at home to Notre Dame. Well, that loss looks a lot worse now that the Irish just lost outright at home to NIU. Mostly, this is just a fate of Connor Weigman and this inept Aggies offense. The quarterback was a highly touted prospect out of high school, but he just hasn't taken that step forward to be serviceable at the collegiate level. He has only 225 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions this year. If he can't protect the ball, it's a recipe for disaster heading into a hostile stadium in Gainesville. Give me the Gators plus the points. I have to lock in the under for this contest. Neither of these quarterbacks are elite playmakers, and I think that's the factor that'll ultimately keep this game under the total. For Graham Mertz, he's much more of a game manager rather than a guy who's going to go out and rack up the points. We saw in the season opener against Miami that the Gators got down early and the game was over because Mertz isn't a dynamic passing threat. One thing that Mertz and Weigman do pretty well is take care of the ball. I know I pointed out Weigman's 2 picks above, but he only has 4 interceptions throughout 3 on and off years at the helm of A&M's offense. As for Mertz, he posted a 20-3 TD/INT ratio last year. This game is going to be pretty conservative, and I think each head coach will just wait for their opponent to make a big mistake. That ultimately leads me to believe that we'll see the under cash. Washington State versus Washington. Both teams have had impressive starts to the 2024 campaign, which builds excitement leading up to this rivalry game. Washington State comes into this one as a live dog and gets an opportunity to take a game from Washington as the Huskies returned just one starter on both sides of the ball and are still learning to gel early in the season. Washington State dominated in their game against Texas Tech and can adjust their offensive game plan depending on what their opponents show them. This balance has allowed them to produce an average of more than 50 points a game this season. It will be tested against the Huskies' defense, but Washington still has a lot to prove as they have played no one of significance yet and has new personnel in the key positions. This is really a great chance for Washington State to get some revenge as Washington has won 9 of the last 10 in the series. The dual threat capabilities of the QB material on the Cougars give them the edge in this game that very well could come down to a last possession score to determine the winner. Take the Cougars with the hook in Seattle. WSU plus 4.5 points. The 56.5 is a high total considering the inexperience on both offenses and defenses who have shown well thus far this season. Additionally, Washington State will utilize the rush frequently, which will keep the clock ticking away. Last season's game between the two schools ended with a 24-21 result favoring the Huskies and going under the 64.5 total. A telling result as the Washington Huskies had one of the most prolific offenses last season and was dialed in at the time of this game. The season is much too new for either of these teams to run the scoreboard here. Go under the total and hope the game isn't an overtime affair. Under 56.5 points. Oregon versus Oregon State. Dan Lanning is back for his 3rd season with Oregon, and the head coach appears to be restoring Oregon back to a powerhouse program. The expectations are huge as the Ducks move to the Big Ten, as the program has championship aspirations. From a sports betting perspective, Oregon, plus 280, trails only Ohio State, plus 110, to win the Big Ten, and they also have the 4th shortest odds, plus 1,100, to win the national championship. Despite the transfer portal gutting Oregon State this past offseason, the biggest departure from the program is former head coach Jonathan Smith. He compiled a 34-35 record at the school, but finished his tenure on a 3-year streak of going to bowl games. Smith left for Michigan State, paving the way for Trent Bray to take the wheel. Bray played at Oregon State from 2002 to 2005, and he's coached on and off at the school for almost a decade. So far, the Bray era is off to a roaring start, as his Beavers are 2-0. They took care of Idaho State 38-15 in the opener and collected a 21-0 victory over San Diego State last weekend. I'm going to ride with Oregon State to cover the spread in this game, but I'm certainly in no rush to lock this bet in. Perhaps we'll see some money come in on Oregon over the next couple of days, moving the line north to a full 17.0 points. Ultimately, this is a rivalry game. You would assume with the conference realignments that it might take out some of the excitement, but I don't think that'll be the case. Oregon State has a coaching staff of guys who played and coached at the college in the early 2000s, so they know that this is a massive game. Oregon has the edge in overall talent. That means that Oregon State will likely have to shorten the game and limit the amount of possessions. Luckily, that's what they're built for. They have a top-tier offensive line, per PFF, and they're averaging 299.5 rushing yards per game this year. That's the fifth best mark in the nation. I think 3 possessions is way too much to lay with Oregon, especially considering Dillon Gabriel and his Ducks have posted an average margin of victory of just 6.5 points through their first 2 tune-up games. Give me the Beavers plus the points. I don't know if I can emphasize just how much of a running team Oregon State truly is. They've run 150 plays this year, and 109 of those plays have been on the ground. That's 72.7% of their plays. The game plan is straightforward with them, in that they want to establish the run and keep the clock moving. On the flip side, Oregon is averaging an elevated 30.5 points per game this season. However, they're averaging only 60.0 plays per game against FBS schools this year, so it appears they're not in a huge rush to push the pace. And, while Dillon Gabriel is a solid option at quarterback, he's nowhere near the caliber of a guy like Bo Nix. I think Gabriel has some big play capabilities, but he's not going to go nuclear in this game. I anticipate this rivalry game turning into a slugfest. If Oregon State can get a few stops and churn the clock on offense, we should soar under this number of 51.0 points. West Virginia versus Pittsburgh. West Virginia has begun the season with a 1-1 record. They are coming off of a big win over FCS Albany. The Mountaineers opened the season by losing to Penn State in one of the most highly anticipated games of Week 1 action, but the Mountaineers were not up for the challenge. Last week, the Mountaineers defeated Albany 49-14 last week. West Virginia opened with a 21-0 lead, and they never looked back for the win. Starting quarterback Garrett Green threw for 236 yards on 17 for 23 passing. He threw 3 touchdowns to lead the Mountaineers. The rush game dominated Albany as C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White both eclipsed 100 yards rushing. Pittsburgh is 2-0 this season. They started the season with a win over Kent State. They followed it by going on the road to face Cincinnati and knocking off the Bearcats in a big-time victory. The Panthers defeated Cincinnati 28-27 thanks to 22 unanswered second-half points. Pitt trailed 27-6 with less than a minute to play in the third quarter. The Panthers started to peel off drive after drive, and the momentum swung in their favor, which culminated in a game-winning Ben Saul's 35-yard field goal with 17 seconds remaining. The backyard brawl between Pitt and West Virginia is one of the best rivalries in college football. The Panthers come into Saturday's game with a ton of confidence after an epic come-from-behind victory over Cincinnati. West Virginia earned their first win last week, albeit by a non-FBS school in Albany. The Mountaineers gave up over 300 passing yards to Albany last week. They were also torched in the passing game against Penn State in Week 1. This is where the Panthers can exploit their rivals. Quarterback Eli Holstein looked sharp in the second half of last week's game. He threw for 3 touchdowns, and the balanced rush attack that they showed last week should benefit the home team. I don't have the confidence that West Virginia can put together a full 60-minute performance after failing to do so in the first 2 weeks of the season. Pitt can string drives together, and they have shown that their defense can stop opponents in 3-and-out consistently. Take Pitt to cover the spread. The two teams can put up points in bunches with their passing attacks. But they have both shown against equal talent, the score will remain low. The under hit for West Virginia against Penn State. The under was also the call for Pitt versus Cincinnati. This is because both teams have settled for field goals instead of red zone touchdowns. This is bound to occur again in this game, especially with the ground game being emphasized by the team that is leading on the scoreboard. Take the under on Saturday.